You're listening to the Artist First World Radio Network, artistfirst.com. Tony K in the studio. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Authors First. This hour, we're so delighted to have a gentleman with a wealth of artistic experience to offer our listeners, our college students, and those joining us from every nation on earth. All broadcasts available free on demand. Be sure to share our content with everyone you know on your social network sites. This hour, author, filmmaker, director, and playwright Rex Pickett joining us to discuss Sideways 3 Chili, released in 140 countries worldwide. He's out there in a big way, and we're so proud to have him on the Artist First Network. How you doing tonight, Rex?
I'm doing really well, Tony. Thank you very much for having me on your show.
Oh, what fun. Expressing yourself on so many levels artistically and working with actors and actresses and thinking through plays and how they'll be performed, acted out, the backdrop. In addition to authorship, which is an entirely different matter, those are lots of hats to wear creatively. Where did it begin for you, Rex? Authorship, or were you into filmmaking and directing before you wrote?
Actually, it began with authorship, and one thing, I grew up in San Diego, kind of in a surf culture, and then I was fortunate to go to the University of California at San Diego, here in La Jolla, great university, and they were a young university, and they had a lot of people come out, and one great influence was Manny Farber. He was a film critic and also a painter and an artist, and there were a lot of other, I was exposed to a lot of great minds and a lot of great films. So I really started out, actually the first thing I did was I wrote poetry. Of course, a lot of writers start on poetry, but I became very influenced by film, and Manny Farber, who died recently, was a tremendous influence. He was showing a lot of avant-garde films, and, you know, Luis Buñuel and Kenji Mitsuguchi and Fellini and these things. It was just eye-opening to me. And I fell in love with film, and then the marriage of writing and film. So I went from writing poetry and experimental novels, which of course never got published, to making film. So that was the first push of it.
Now, Rex Pickett, before you landed at that university, there had to have been some artistic interest in high school, grade school. Come on.
Well, you know, I grew up in San Diego. It was a small town back then. I will say, I don't know, I felt a sense of alienation. I wanted to express myself. So many people, of course, picked up the guitar. Both my brothers are excellent guitarists. I didn't have any facility for music. I couldn't draw. And I wanted a way to express myself like a lot of people. And I remember in my senior year at high school, I didn't like the principal, and I wrote a poem called Mr. Pencilhead. And they published it in the high school, I don't know, newspaper, literary magazine. And he called me into his office, and he said, I know you wrote this about me, and it was a pretty disdainful work. And I thought, the power of words, he called me into his office, and so I fell in love with words. And then I started reading, and I fell in love with literature and reading really great books, and it took off from there.
And then you went to college and fell in love with women, and you found them at the theater.
Yeah.
No, I understand. Having that cultural interest, or finding your voice, saying, hey, this is something I can and I enjoy doing, was writing a poem. And it impressed you. And when you got to university, you were eager to find others who had that same interest.
That's exactly right. I owe the University of California, San Diego so much, and the professors who were there. I mean, exposure I got, I went really from kind of a surf culture, if you want to know the truth, to a very intellectual and aesthetic, artistic, and you have to be open to it. Other people have the same potential. I just was open to it, and a lot of people, when they went to the university or off to college, they dreaded it. I didn't dread it. I dreaded summer, if you want to know the truth. I look forward. I'm not joking. I'm not joking. I've done 3 faculty club dinners I've hosted, and they've never had anyone do more than one. I love giving back to the university because I want to call it my incubation period. And I actually stayed there for 6 years, even though I only got a BA. They had film equipment, and it was widely available. I could make films. I mean, my goodness, it was it not only was I call it a great sandbox with wonderful minds kind of encircling or engirding you to do what you wanted. I was a special projects major. It wasn't like some hardcore major. I created my own major. They don't have that anymore. And my diploma says specializing in contemporary literary and film criticism and creative writing. And really, that's really what I've done and become. So I owe the university a lot.
Oh, what fun. And you never know where that creative talent will end.
No.
You get involved in a project, and then that leads to another project, and you meet people, and
that's
suddenly, wow, I was over here, and now I'm over there. And you
that's exactly right, Tony. First of all, film and it's a very different time, of course, because we're in the digital day when it's so much easier to make a film than the day that I was making it was the analog. You had to buy film and put it in the camera, and the cameras were expensive, and to process that film and to make a work print of it so you could edit it because you don't want to scratch your negative. I mean, very, very expensive. And people don't know this, but film schools back in the 70s, there weren't that many of them, or the 80s, let's say, even. A lot of films never got finished because of it being, the days. But, you're right. You make a film and you learn. You learn film not so much by being in school and going to classes. You learn it by doing. And yes, going to classes can be good and being exposed and meeting other people, but you learn by doing. It's the same with writing. You've got to write, you've got to get it out there, and you've got to get the reaction to it. And sometimes the reaction, we're going to get to these stories, I'm sure, but Sideways, the novel, an unpublished novel, was hated by many, many people. I mean, hated. And here we are 11 years later, and I'm not trying to brag or anything, but the adaptation, which is a faithful adaptation of my novel, because the novel reads a lot like a screenplay, has won more awards than any other screenplay in the history of cinema.
Now, that over a 10-year, this is a 10-year period, correct? From its release?
After it came out. Let's be fair. There are more awards given out today, but it is it is the most decorated screenplay in the history of cinema. And, and I take great pride in that. I'm not credited as the co-adapter, but I wrote the Bible for it. And, those characters, I just got back from 5 months in Italy writing a movie. And, literally just got back a week ago. And people still remember those characters. They still remember, the story, and you say Sideways, and it means something, and that I take great pride in that whole thing, and it was a long, people will say to me sometimes, how long did it take you to write Sideways, the novel? And my answer sometimes is a flip answer, which is my whole life. But in a way, it's true, Tony. Going back to your question, I don't want to digress because I have a bad habit of that. I started, I wrote poetry and I showed it to people, and then I made a little short film and I met some people, and gradually I gravitated to Los Angeles, to USC Film School. I wasn't happy there. Met my, now ex-wife, but she was just named the chair of NYU Tisch School of the Art Graduate Film. She did a short film that I wrote that won the 2000 Academy Award that you probably know. And we made 2 feature films together. And we really, it was 10 years of our life, and we learned a lot and met people. And you don't know, you're right, Tony, you don't know where it's going to take you, but you just got to, if the drive is there, if the desire is there, you'll keep pushing through.
If you find that niche, that comfort zone, this is the realm that I really thrive and love, and you have that passion, that drive, it's not work. You're
absolutely right. I've said this a number of times. If you put me in a job that I hate within 30 minutes, it's so cripplingly boring. I just want to get out of there. But when I'm writing or when I was making films, the things, the various
you're so immersed. You just
in Italy. I had to ideate. They gave me complete freedom to ideate a movie, But really, from the day I got there, from the day I arrived, I'd never been in Italy before I arrived in Rome, or the Sideways 3 Chile novel, where I went to Chile to ideate the whole thing. I mean, it was work. It wasn't really vacation, but it wasn't really work either, because you're living in your imagination. You're driven by the work itself, and it's not. It doesn't feel like work. It doesn't feel like drudgery. It's actually a real high, if anything else.
Yeah, that adrenaline is moving, and then you might come down and feel a little low, like, gee, I'm not doing anything right now.
Those aren't necessarily bad things. I've said to people that, the low moments, obviously as artists, we're all going to have depressing times, and we're going to have to deal with a lot of rejection, and a lot of us aren't going to, so-called quote unquote make it, and there are some good people who haven't made it, and there are actually some mediocre people who did make it just because they persevered. So you don't really know. I mean, for me, it wasn't about persevering. Honestly, at age 17, 18, I said, this is who I am. I didn't know what I would become, but I said, this is who I am, and that's what I'm going to be. And I don't care if I end up on the breadline or I end up, in the proverbial, mansion on top of the hill. It's actually, the truth is neither. But, this is who I am.
In a sense,
it's a life, Tony. It's a life.
And it's sort of some cases like being cast in a role. You're always Gilligan.
Yeah.
What am I, the character or am I the actor? Which is which? And does that happen somewhat as an author when you're building and creating, and then all of it? Where are you? You're lost in it.
I am, and in my case, I've had a couple of writing epiphanies, and it's when I started to insert myself into the work. And Sideways is very autobiographical, and Sideways 3 Chile is also very autobiographical. It's not nonfiction, but I draw from real life, and I did the same thing when I went to Italy and wrote a screenplay. I really wrote about a guy going to Italy trying to write a screenplay, so kind of 8.5 in that way. And so you're exposing yourself. It can be tough when people reject you because you feel like they're really rejecting you, as opposed to writing, say, I don't know, a cop thriller or something like that. They're just rejecting the work. They're really rejecting you. But I find that I get to a level of I disappear into my work as who I am. I don't differentiate myself from the characters. They're people I know, and I'm pretty much in every one of them. I put myself on the line in them because it's the only way. It's when I first started getting validation is when I started doing that.
Yeah, there are plenty of people who wouldn't recognize or even care to recognize a Picasso. Might not even enjoy that genre of painting.
Yeah.
And the same is true, of course, with literature, with writing, and film. We don't all like the same thing.
Well, we don't, and we are, our aesthetic sensibilities are fashioned from, our exposure and what we like, and I tend to like the more personal things, the things that have, I call it the ring of verisimilitude. I often say that, I sometimes do, master classes in writing and other things, and I want things to ring true for me, and the way that they ring true for me is to draw on things, real experience. I know there's a cliche, write what you know. I have to admit I'm a proponent of that, but I love to be able to fictionalize from that point. So I may begin, in the case of Sideways, with a real weekend I spent with a friend with mine, but then I took it to another level to make it a fully fleshed out movie and had to fictionalize. But inside there are real emotions, are real people with inner lives who have 3 dimensions, and that's one of the real problems I have with movies and things today is I see too much 2-dimensionality. But it's a real risk to put yourself that nakedly on the screen or on the page, as it were. But once you have a success, the likes of Sideways, it emboldens you to keep going deeper and to go further with it. But you're risking a lot. But then that's what art is. It's taking you're risking your life, first of all, by going against the grain of what your parents want you to do, what society wants you to do. Nobody really wants you until they want you, until you have something that they want. Nobody really wants you. So your first problem as an artist is inertia. You're fighting against inertia because there's no one pulling you toward them. Nobody wants you. And then when they do, of course, then you find yourself suddenly, you pick up these shadows of people called agents and managers and producers, and suddenly now they want you.
And they know what's best.
Then you got to watch out. You got to watch your back pocket.
Yeah, and they know what's best.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Don't get me started on that. Somebody asked me this question today, just a couple hours ago. I was talking about Italy and why writers in Hollywood particularly are not treated very well, and they're not at all. They're disrespected quite a bit. In Italy, it's a different story. They have great respect for me. But, we do something that, producers, directors, actors, studio people, they need the written word. Even today, with all this digital and everything else and all this content, they still need the written word. But once they have it, they seem to want to discard you and or use you or replace you or whatever. As one famous Oscar-winning producer said to me once, he said, "When we hire you, we own you." But it's also, I think there's jealousy too. I think they would like to be able, when I wake up in the morning, I'm looking at a blank screen, Tony, and so I'm creating from nothing. I'm taking the ultimate risk, which is, to put myself out there for others to use. Because think about it, actors, directors, producers do not exist without a screenplay. They don't exist. They can't create something out of thin air. But once they have it, then they want to hog the spotlight and take credit and do a lot of other things. And so you've got to fight. You've got to fight that too. I mean, writers have always been in that position.
Rex Pickett, our guest on Authors First. Tony K in the studio. Thanks, audience, for joining us worldwide. Be sure to visit the website, rexpickett.com, to learn all the details. You won't be disappointed. We're so excited to have Rex on board with us this hour. Rex, when you're writing as an author, you're putting yourself out there, as you've said. When you look at it through the lens of a director, do you have some fear of who that director might be and what lens or how they may view what you've written?
A great question, Tony. You're asking one after another. Usually I get the question about, hey, how do you feel about destroying the Merlot industry? But so these are great questions. I got very lucky with Sideways because I knew Alexander Payne's work, and I knew that he was a consummate artist. And when I met him, we really clicked. You're giving your work over to him. You're handing your characters over to him. I mean, let's be honest. He's the one. I had no power when I optioned my novel to him. He had all the power. We call it the green lighting power to get it made. But in somebody else's hand, as I've joked a number of times before, Sideways could have been two guys doing Jell-O shots in Cancun. I mean, it's Hollywood. I mean, they can do whatever they want to your novel. Here's a man who, had already established himself as a critic's darling, really, and had his own unique sensibility. He changed some things, but not very much. He shot in the real location. But yes, it is a fear. It is even with the Italian project I just finished. Now they're going after a director, and it'll make all the difference who that person is, because the director will be the one who decides the cast. And then that will make all the difference. Alexander Payne, when he did Sideways, he did the adaptation with his partner Jim Taylor, but he directed, he was able to demand a Paul Giamatti and a Thomas Hayden Church. These were unknowns at the time. And anyone else, they would have had those usual names, those big stars, and it wouldn't have been the same movie. So there's a lot of things that have to come together, right? And it starts, you're right, with the director, but, if you're coming from a place where as I was at the time, broke and destitute, more or less, you just hope they option your novel. You just hope it gets made, and then, to have it get made by somebody of his caliber and his perfectionism and professionalism and uncompromising, refusing to make the film unless he got the cast that he wanted. This is well documented. Is just beyond fortunate from my standpoint. And yes, the fear is there. And, I like to think to the writers out there who are listening, don't think about any of that. Just try to, control what you can control, which is your writing and your output. Do the writing and hope for the best. And yes, there probably are great screenplays that have gotten destroyed and novels that have been destroyed by senior editors who thought they knew better or whatever. This is all true. But if you think about those things, it'll paralyze you, and I try not to think about them. I got lucky with Sideways, but I could tell you stories where, things didn't go the way I wanted them to go. I'd prefer to dwell on the positive because, the thing is, it's about the output, Tony. Do the work. Write the novel. Write the screenplay. Do the work. And if you're good, let's hope that, fortune smiles on you as it did me. But it wasn't an overnight success to get to that point.
Writing something that means something to you and then riding with it, keeping with it, expanding the possibilities with what you've created. Today, authors have the internet, Twitter, Facebook, social networking. They have book trailers, YouTube, outlets, internet radio like artistfirst.com, places they can go to self-promote that. Well, let's face it, in the 80s, 70s, none of that existed.
Well, now you're getting on another really big topic, which is content. And, here's a statistic for you. I don't know who came up with it, but the Internet churns more content in 24 hours than the entire 20th century, every 24 hours.
Yeah, that's a lot of material.
20th century. And if you think about it, if you go back, like you said, to the 70s or whatever, you had 3 or 4 channels on your TV, and it was all appointment viewing. You had 6 or 7 major publishers, a few small publishers. You know where I'm going with this. You had a few newspapers, whatever. Today, with the Internet, everyone can be a novelist, everyone can be a journalist, everyone can be a filmmaker. And, I could give you an example after. We have so much content out there that it's great because it's what I've often said what the Internet and digital has done is it's giving everybody a chance. That's the good news. The bad news is it's giving everybody a chance. And I don't say that, I want everybody to have a chance. I want that democracy. But there may be more people producing content today than there are, consuming. So, it's something I think about a lot.
You're right. And Rex, there are a lot of similarities, a lot of programming you could lump in together and say, this is all so similar, and the same with literature, with books. You can just bundle them up. And so the choice is, what is that unusual? What is the cream of the crop? How do I gain access to that top 10% of material that I'll have time for? That the best movie, the best book, the best programming with the content I enjoy. And that's developing a whole world of apps and methods of people chronicling and collecting and seeking out that type of specialized information.
These are subjects with my friends I talk about every day. Content, the future of content. Look, I'm not 25 years old anymore, as anyone can find out on the Internet. And so when I sit down to write a novel like Sideways 3 Chili, or I go to Italy, well, that wasn't a hard choice to go to Tuscany and write an original screenplay. But, I think long and hard about the future of content and who is going to, be reading it. I mean, in the case of Sideways 3 Chili, I created, in the movie, Alexander Payne, the movie did it. I didn't make the movie. I wrote the novel, but I created the characters. They've now become officially iconic characters. And I hate to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Sideways is a brand. I mean, that word is a brand. People know that word almost anywhere. So I think in this sort of tsunami of content, if we liken it to, Hoover Dam and Lake Mead, and there used to be a trickle of water coming out. And that was the 1960s and 70s. And then that body of water is up there. Imagine that Hoover Dam has been dynamited. It's just, and that water's just coming down. That's today. That's content today. And in that tsunami of content that's everywhere, I think people are looking for originality and islands of recognizability. And for me, the island, I think that we're looking for, that which really differentiates itself from the pack, if you will, and those comfort areas where we have characters who we just fell in love with. And one of the reasons I did the play, Sideways the play, I did it kind of as an experiment. People approached me to do it at a little 50-seat theater in Santa Monica 3 years ago, and I said, okay, I'll do it, I'll try it, and I wasn't sure, and it was a huge success. Tony, it ran only 3 performances a week, and it broke all records and ran for 6 months. And it brought out a lot of people who wouldn't go to theater, but they loved Sideways, and it was a new way to experience the characters. And I was afraid maybe it would just be looking like I was, cannibalizing myself or whatever. No, it was a different medium. I fell in love with theater. It went straight to La Jolla Playhouse with Des McAnuff, who directed Jersey Boys. And now it's going to go, and it broke all records at the La Jolla Playhouse. So, people fell in love with those characters because they were recognizable. I'm not really in terms of there's in terms of content. There are other. I see a lot of consumption of content that can be very shallow. I don't want to say what it is, and we kind of all know what it is. And I would hope that we would. That young people would be moving toward what I was trying to move toward, which was developing, an aesthetic sensibility, something that nourishes your soul, something that feeds your mind, and not just the kind of content that just leaves you empty and blank and listless and torpid. Let's, art should enrich in our life. It should make us think more. It should, and that's. I mean, I know that sounds a little arrogant, but that's what I've always tried to do. I've always, tried to dig as deep as I could and give the most of myself, and not just, do some sort of sellout kind of thing. And but it's a great question where content is going, and it's changing. Just when I think I have a little bit of a handle on it, it seems to change again.
You've completed Sideways, the trilogy now, right?
Yep.
And really.
Yeah, no, and Alexander Payne doesn't want to, he doesn't, for some reason, he doesn't want to, the biggest no-brainer in Hollywood is to make the sequel and to keep going, and he doesn't want to do it. He wants to move on with himself, and that's, with his own career, and that's fine. But yeah, this is Sideways 3, Chili is I wasn't, when I wrote a sequel called Vertical, I wasn't sure I'd write the third one, but then Chili offered me this opportunity. And I started to think about it, and I literally just said I'll come down and just check it out, which is kind of a thumbnail of what really happened. But and then I went into it, and I kind of fell in love with the full arc of the character. The main character is really Miles, the Paul Giamatti person, because it was written in first person, Sideways, from the standpoint of Miles. So Miles is really me. You're talking to him right now, and he's changed. He changes in the book. It's not like The Hangover, which is just they just regurgitated the first one.
No, in other words, the interaction, the events that happen, the depression and the exhilaration of life changes people, right? I mean, and your friends, their circumstances change, and that influences you too.
Without question, and I'm not, I don't, like I say, I draw from real things, and where, I feel like I've evolved from the guy who wrote Sideways, a guy who was like Miles, who was a failure, and I don't feel like I'm a failure today, but that doesn't mean I'm not beset by my own demons and by my own feelings of insecurity or sense of worthlessness or self-effacement or whatever. I mean, I think that those things don't necessarily go away.
Well, that's why we...
Some measure of success.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we love Rex Pickett. Because that's the reality of life. Come on.
Yeah.
We don't always, it's up, it's down, it's good this decade, bad the last one, okay? You just have to keep pushing forward and not giving up, not losing that hope of, hey, tomorrow the wine will be better.
Right. You know, I'm trying to chronicle that emotional journey in the most truthful way I can. And, you know, I've taken some slings and arrows for it. So, you know, but, you know, I'm hardest on myself. You know, I'm not that hard on the other people that I may draw on. But I write from a very personal place. And I'm not the only one. Many, you know, the writers I've been drawn to in the past who wrote from very personal places were the ones that I was probably most influenced by over the years, and same with the filmmakers. It's not the only way to write. It's not the only way to create art, and it's not the only art that I like. It's just the way that I do it and know how to do it.
It's the age-old problem. You lose your best friend. They got married.
Yeah.
You know, that's what happens.
Yeah.
And so that we're so technologically interested that we can walk in the middle of traffic. We can drive our cars while we're on a mobile device, texting, and kill ourselves and our children at the same time. We're so technologically interested there. You know, we're losing, I think, in some level that personal, social, hey, we all get together and brainstorm and talk and touch each other and have a drink and, you know, a way into our social environment is found on the internet.
Well, there's a movie out. I haven't seen it yet. Just came out by Noah Baumbach called While We're Young, and it's a couple in their, I guess, late 40s, and they make friends of a couple in their 20s who grew up on the internet, but they have a real retro sensibility. And the point, I mean, I've read some reviews of it. I'm eager to see it. But the point is that people who've grown up on the internet, which I didn't, I think that there's something that's intrinsic to human beings, and it's actually positively archetypal, and that is wanting some sense of authenticity in the world, some sense of tactility. And I think with the internet, we can get lost. As I often like to say about the internet, it's a dark road to infinity, potholed with links. But there are good things to the internet too, and I think that this younger generation is looking back to what was authentic, what was real, what can they touch that's really real, because we have a term for this other thing. It's called virtual reality. So that's not real reality. So one thing that really excites me about theater, for example, is that's one thing that the internet, you can't bring home, and you can't replicate it at home in any way. And I'm not saying it isn't going to go beyond a niche audience, but theater actually is actually attendance is going up in theater a little bit, because it's just something that there's something so nakedly real about it, so personal. I mean, real people are there. It's almost like live music as opposed to watching a concert on TV. And I think that younger generation is going to feel that need to interact and to touch. I just hope, we don't, as a culture, get completely lost in the internet.
Well, it will
govern our lives in a way that will actually impoverish them, I think.
Rex Pickett, that's our video. You'll be giving your dissertation, your presentation to your students via the mobile device today. No one's in the classroom; they're all logged on to some reality connection.
Hey, and look, when I was in Italy, to be honest with you, I mean, I think the people who created Google Maps ought to be given a Nobel Prize. Because I might be with a den of wild boar in the middle of Tuscany somewhere without Google Maps. So, I'm not, I'm not a Luddite. Okay, I'm fully technical. I got a computer to the right of me. I got a Kindle to the left of me. I don't even have a landline phone.
Oh yeah, you're connected. You've got the juice running through the veins.
But I do think about it because I, on a less facetious note, I do straddle both generations. You know, the one that was pre-digital, pre-internet, and one that's fully in the internet. And I'm fully in the internet. I mean, when I write, I used to write on started on a typewriter and went, to an IBM Selectrix and then to a computer. And I was one of the first adopters of the computer. And I now write only on a laptop, and the internet is humming in the background. And it's a great tool. It's a fantastic tool. It can also be, it can take you down that road, and and you get lost in it, and you come out feeling a little bit empty, because you realize you're reading a lot of robo-journalism, and you're not hearing real, authentic voices anymore. And I think that, and going back to that, wanting that sense of something authentic, something real that comes from, look, I've had people tell me they've read or seen the DVD of Sideways hundreds of times, and I think we're not making those kind of films anymore, and I think it's because those characters are so lived in and so real. I mean, it makes me feel really gratified that I created something that it's still resonates, and with a generation that was probably too young to see it in the theater because it was an R-rated movie, or just discovering it now. And so it's I straddle both generations.
And, of course, the blog, and being there, I guess, I still haven't exactly figured it out, or has it seen its heyday and now it's supplanted with Facebook or Twitter? Those seem to be the dominant forces over the blog these days.
Yeah, I think I haven't blogged as much as I would like. I think that I know I am, and many people, we're into what's called content overload. What TV shows should I watch? And they follow you around in a way, because it's not appointment viewing anymore. And which one should I get hooked on? And which one should I binge watch? And which blog should I read? There's not hundreds, there's not thousands, there's hundreds of thousands of blogs. And what news organization should I go to get my news? We are in, it used to be, the Los Angeles Times or the New York Times or whatever city you're in, or Cleveland, whatever, Plains Dealer or whatever, dropped on your doorstep, and that was your news. Well, seriously, maybe the radio, and then you turn on the TV, and you had 3 stations, and you had a couple theaters in town, and those were your choices.
Hey, I delivered those Sunday papers.
Well, I did too. Sunday was a heavy day.
Yeah.
It used to take me 2 circuits of my neighborhood, But, we obviously we live in a different time. I'm not fighting the time again, Tony, and I'm not a Luddite. I'm trying to understand it in terms of what I do. I know this sounds Luddite, but I'm a huge believer in theater right now, not only because I have a play, and I still believe in the novel, and which is why I wrote Sideways Street Philly, because I think people are going to want to unplug and want to let themselves go to that experience, because I don't think anything really replaces the novel. I admit that they are getting shorter. I don't know if the younger generation could read War and Peace, today, but or if I had a famous agent say to me, "Don't bring me anything more than 50,000 words," but which is basically a novella. It is, our attention spans are getting shorter, and I worry about what that's doing, to the development of the mind, and all these things I consider before I sit down and develop and write content. Because I want to, whatever worth I have, whatever voice I have, and whatever value that voice has, I'll let other people decide that. I want it, obviously, like anyone else, I want to reach the widest audience. I don't want to spend a year or 2 years of my life writing a novel and have 5 people read it, And at the same token, that's the risk we take. I mean, I'm probably, I love poetry, but I probably am not going to necessarily, go back to writing poetry.
Well, you could make more than 5 people read it. Come on.
Yeah, that's probably true.
But there is that wonder. You just have to when you write, you don't know. I mean, you can't say that everything that you produce will be a home run. Not every novel will be just worldwide and be the best ever. And I've interviewed authors who were discovered after book 30. And yet book 1 was most excellent.
It could be. It's sometimes it takes a while to work yourself to a place, which I think for me, I wouldn't say I was a late bloomer, but probably a middle bloomer in some ways. Some hit it right out of the blocks, like F. Scott Fitzgerald, and then that can become its own curse too, as it did for him.
Yeah.
Ernest Hemingway. I mean, did he ever really repeat the greatness of The Sun Also Rises, his first novel? I mean, he got close to it, but it's a great novel. There might be some Sun Also Rises out there that never got published, and they published the 10th one, or the person gave up. It brings up a huge question, and
there's no doubt not everyone can live with fame. I mean, we'd like to have it, and we'd also like to believe if we had it, we could live with it. But not everyone succeeds.
No, they don't. And then, of course, there's what is the definition of success. And is it that you have the widest audience? I mean, then we would say that the author of 50 Shades of Grey, who by her own admission says, I write dribble, is a success. But I don't think anyone from a literary standpoint would consider her a success, not to put her down. I mean, literary or critical success, she clearly is not, by her own admission. But she's successful, from another standpoint. So it's how you measure success. And for me, I guess it's for me, it's in durability of the work. So when people come up to me and remember Sideways 11 years later, or say that I saw your play 4 years ago and I loved it, and they remember it and it resonated and it touched them in some way, that's how I measure success. Not in terms of what's in the bank account, and not in terms of how many books I sold, or it's really how many people that I touched or transformed. I've had people tell me after they saw Sideways they changed their whole life. Quit their job and went and did something else.
That's fun. That is just fun, period.
And it comes out of nowhere, and I'm grateful to all my fans, and I'm generous to them, and because that is so. That's what I wrote for. I wrote to touch people. I grew up in Southern California in an alienating world where I didn't probably have a lot of friends, and I wanted to reach out and and touch people in a certain way, and hasn't always been an easy life. Some people say to me, Rex, you live such a charmed life, especially after Italy. And I always say to them, you wouldn't want to live the life I've lived in order to live the ostensibly charmed life I'm currently living.
Well said. Well said and well written. Thank you, Rex Pickett, for joining Authors First. Tony K. in the studio.
Thank you, Tony, so much for having me.
What a great time.
Thank you all the fans of Sideways. And, please read Sideways 3 Chili. I put my heart and soul into that one, too. So.
And of course, Vertical.
And Vertical, too, of course. Yeah, you need to read all 3 of them.
And, do you really have to read them that way? I mean, can you jump in late in the game, or do you need the backdrop?
Yeah, I hate to say this. I know it sounds self-serving, but Vertical, of course, is 7 years later, and Sideways 3 Chilies another 3 years later. So they move chronologically in a way, and you see the evolution of the characters. Particularly Miles, but also Jack too. And they really, I think they would surprise you. They're not just, rehashes of the first one. And they really are the evolution of that character.
They've grown up, just like you have.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, and that comes through when you write over a long period of time.
Did you say grown up like I've grown up?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I hope my ex-wife is listening to this.
Well, that's all right. Come on.
No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Hey, I'd love to be the man I was at 39, at 49, well, at
Right.
59. Okay? Well, I won't go beyond that, but you get my point. If you work on characters, themes, concepts for a decade of your life, it's how you breathe. They're real. And that's what has happened, and that's what creates such a believable circumstance and such incredible personalities. Rex Pickett, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much,
being here.
Tony.
What
I mean,
fun.
Great questions, and it's been a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
I know. Now, before I let you go, please give our audience a summation. Where are we headed in the next 5 years? Do you have a feel for that?
Oh, my goodness. Where are we headed in the next 5 years? As far as movies go, I think I'll give you some of my predictions. I think that movie theaters in 5 years will only be IMAX, and that the movie will come into the home. It will be shorter. The 2-hour feature film, plus or minus 30 minutes, may be close to extinction. Think about it. Movies have only been around 100 years. I'm not sure. I think the novel will still be with us. I think it will be a little bit shorter, but it will story though is archetypal, and it's intrinsic to mankind. Is storytelling will be there. And to the writers out there, I'm going to tell you this right now: no matter if storytelling is coming into the home, and if it's getting shorter, like House of Cards, getting it to us in 45-minute segments or whatever it is, they still have to begin with the written word. I don't think the written word is going to be eliminated or obliterated by the internet or by any new younger generation. The written word is still going to drive story in whatever way. I think theater has a future. I think audible books has a future, and I think that, but I think it is coming more and more into the home, and we might see, I'll use a fancy word, enantiodromia, which is something that turns into its opposite. We might see a younger generation revolt against this internet and start to turn outward and start to look for, stories and human interaction again, and go outside of the computer. So that's what I'm predicting. It's coming into the home, and then it's going to take us back out to the world eventually.
And you'll be right here with us, Rex Pickett.
I hope so.
Or sooner.
Yeah.
So we can't wait for your return. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Tony. Take care.
Hi, this is Briar-Lee Mitchell, author of Big Ass Shark and Walking on Mars. Check out my books at www.briarmitchell.com. And remember, you are listening to the Artist First Radio Network, and that makes you seriously special. So keep tuning in.
This is George Thorogood of the Destroyers, and you're listening to Artist First Radio.
This is Johnny Sirfoss. Check out my debut CD, available at CD Baby and johnnysirfoss.com. And you are listening to the Artist First Radio Network.